Welcome to this episode of All Things LOCS, where we talk everything leadership, operations, culture, and strategies for growth. And today, what we're going to be doing for you guys is instead of interviewing a guest, it's going to be the two of us talking about everything related to hiring. Ooh, I know the thing that most companies struggle with. You know, if you talk to anybody who's in the position, whether it's HR, management, or ownership, they might tell you stuff like, there's no good people out there, I can't find any good talent, or if we hire somebody, they don't stay very long or they don't do the job. When in reality, it might just be your hiring process. So that's what we wanted to touch on today. After getting a lot of feedback from business owners we've worked with, we know this is part of the problem and part of the challenge. So we want to kind of kick it off today. And I'm going to start by asking my partner, Antonio Garcia here, when a company is coming to you, or just in general, if you had to give them great solid advice of like, where do I begin to cultivate a great hiring process, what would you tell them?
So the first thing that I would ask them is, what are they actually looking for? So for me personally, I always try to look at hiring as like a three-part sequence, is that you want to get data on an individual. Because one of the hardest things, when running a company, like the top two biggest pain in the asses for these entrepreneurs is finding and hiring the right talent, and then aligning that talent to an ultimate objective or a strategy. So you can find the right person, but if we're not training them and having the right structure in place to actually help them get up to highway speed for that particular role, then it's all for nothing. And so when a company is like, hey, if they're coming and they're saying, I want to get this actually run a little bit better, right? Or I'm expanding, I'm moving into other departments that I'm not familiar with. Like, how do I find like a legal person? How would I find like a good marketing person? All that stuff. There's kind of two parts. One of them is if you're hiring internal, or if you're hiring a third party like vendor. Because both of those, from the eyes of an entrepreneur, is like, I still have to vet the person to do a job.
When you say a third party vendor, you mean like a recruiter, or
if you're hiring, so instead of hiring like, let's just say a CMO and maybe a marketing strategist, and you're trying to hire like someone that does copyright, instead of maybe doing that and hiring 3 people or 4 or 5 people, you're hiring an agency that handles all that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. So because you're still trying to get the same outcome. What I would say that I think a lot of organizations they miss is understanding human dynamics and understanding psychology. I think the organizations that get that right when they go through a hiring process is that they need to get their prospects or their potential employees to do behavioral assessment tools. Everyone has been in that same situation where like they'll walk in and they'll lie to the employer. Of course I got 20 years experience. Of course I got this. Of course I know this. I really would love the job. I would love this position. And they're just kind of put it on the front, and then you hire them, you put them in that role, and it's not a good fit. So what you want to do is you want to get a behavioral assessment tool of some type. DISC is a really good one. Predictive Index is a really good one. Is you want to get data on the front end to see if the person is even wired for a particular role. And then from there, you want to move over into actually setting up an interview and then discussing core values. You can have the right mindset and the right experience, but a toxic person in your organization.
So I'm just going to cut you off there for just 1 second, because you just laid out a ton. Like, I'm sure somebody listening is like, holy crap, that's a lot of info in like 3 minutes. But I want to start with, you talked about getting data, finding the right person. And I do find that that's a challenge for a lot of organizations. So maybe you could expand upon that segment a little bit of just knowing like what role you're actually hiring for. Because I do find that it's a challenge for a lot of people. We need somebody that's like, what role? It's like,
yeah, and they'll just kind of wing it. They're like, I know someone. And so when you're looking at designing a particular role, you want to look at a couple of things. Like, is this, strange as it sounds, like, is this an introverted role or is this an extroverted role? Is this something that's a little bit more analytically leaning, or this is more of a feel or a gut? So think of sales versus legal as an example, or accounting. So I think when you're starting to design a role, once you have a good foundation of people with introversion, extroversion, if they're formal, informal, things like that, and actually outline of what that role can look like, and then when you're trying to find what would be like a good example of a role that's something would make sense in healthcare.
Let's just say like honestly, like a doctor.
Okay.
Doctor versus like a front desk. If you're talking like personality or something like that, like something like that.
Oh, absolutely. So when you're looking at someone like a front desk, repetitive tasks, sitting in a closed environment, right? Like, or usually for the most part, sitting in a closed environment and doing the same things over and over, a little bit more on the reserve side, but really good customer service. So when you map something like that out, you're able to essentially create a profile, and you're able to find out like which individuals or what profiles can match into that. And so when someone is going through a hiring process, when they do a behavioral assessment survey of some type, you're able to match that person to see if they're driven to even take on that role before you even have an interview with them. That's going to save business owners a ton of time. So they're not having to meet with everybody to get a no, but they can meet with some of the people that are aligned with their behavioral assessment tool and also with the role itself.
Yeah. All right. I like that, Nick, because then you started getting into, when you're talking about a DISC. So it's like you have an understanding of what role are we looking for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what kind of person do we want to fill that role? Expand a little bit if you can on, somebody's like, I don't know what a DISC is, or, maybe Myers-Briggs or predictive index. Like, what does that mean? And like, what is really the importance of having at least a little bit of an understanding of human psychology as it relates to hiring people for a company?
100%. If you take a step back and you look at human nature, people are typically in like 4 quadrants. And these 4 quadrants is depending on which organization you're looking at. So like DISC, it's like, dominance and steadiness and influence. Larry Wilson learning, they have like analytical, amiable, expressive. You also have like MBTI that's like 16 to 17 profiles, but they're kind of in also 4 quadrants, predictive index. What this basically means is that you have some people that make fast decisions. You have other people that make slow decisions. You have people that are focused on a thing, so like an engineer on a software or on a bridge or on construction. You have other people that are focused on individuals. So think of like psychiatrists and nurses and things like that. And on this spectrum, on this quadrant, you have people that lean in one direction or another, and they're tried and true. I believe this is like how society, our human society is wired. So you are in predictive index, a maverick, and then also in DISC, you're a high D, right? Yeah. So for you, Dan, it's like you really lean towards the what. What are we doing? What do we need? What can we get done? What's left to accomplish this goal? Like results, let's move, let's fucking go.
Results oriented.
Very results oriented. So people that are very results oriented, sometimes they can drive really, really hard, right? So you need other people on the other side that are like kind of analytical, where it's like, whoa, Dan, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Let's actually devise a plan that we can follow that ensures that we get a result. And you're like, all right, that makes sense. Yep. Like, it's like, of course, I'm going a little hard here. Or fuck, like I did this and I wish I would have maybe planned this out a little bit better. So that's for folks that are a little bit more analytical, that they come in. They are very process and systems oriented, but they are very driven by getting the right result. So you have those 2 people that really drive society. The glue are people that are actually quite amiable. So someone that is a driver with an analytical, sometimes they'll butt heads because you want to fucking go and they want to do it right. The people that are the amiables are really great at being glue, creating harmony in a society, creating harmony in a village. Hey guys, let's get along. We need each other. Let's not be at each other's throats. And then the 4th one is people who are energy, expressives. They are the life of the party. They keep everything fun. They keep everything light. They keep everything moving. They keep the energy at a high vibration. And you kind of need all 4 of these to advance. People for you is like to keep you, like, all right, I'm going a little hard in the paint. Have you ever had that where someone's like, Dan, you went like really harsh here, and you're like, oh shit, right?
Yep.
And then there's amiables that's like, you actually like, dude, like stand up for yourself. Let's get after it, right? So we kind of need each other like that. And what I see the most conflict with people in hiring, going back to hiring, is that they will tend to stick to hiring people like themselves in roles that are outside of themselves, right? And so now you're having a bunch of, let's just say, introverted people supposed to be in all these other departments, and your business is kind of lacking maybe some energy or enthusiasm or sales or marketing, that you need someone that's actually a little bit different than you.
So, like, just because I really need to, that I shouldn't say that thing. I know it's an important point you just made, and just to kind of give it a little recap, it sounds like you're saying just you need like a diverse range of personality, so to speak.
Yeah.
to fill the roles that they, the personality is called for versus what a lot of people do. And I've experienced this myself. It's like, hey, I found another person who's just like you.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if we're all the same, not every role might require that personality. Plus, along with the way we act is also the way that we think.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's like we're all thinking the same and we're all doing the same. Who's the person in the room who's going to actually maybe challenge, or to your point, that person is like, hey, question, like maybe we should do this and this. If you have all people who are just high D's, like, let's just take a lot of action. It's like, what about all like the processes we got to build out and all the mistakes now we have to kind of go back and clean up that we could have avoided with like
100%.
a little bit of a thought process. So that is a good point, because a lot of people, look, at the end of the day, rapport is built on people that we like, right? So it's like, who should we like more than ourselves? It's like, I love people like me. It's like, let's hire more people like that. It's like, you don't need that.
That's so true. And I feel like that's natural. Here's a big misnomer that happens a lot, like with a lot of the sales gurus out there, is they talk about common interests, not common behaviors. Like we live in Vegas. I mean, so the Raiders is our football team. Just because I go to a Raiders game doesn't mean I like everybody that's in there. Or if everyone is Mexican that drives this vehicle that is wearing black, has 3 kids, and we all like the Raiders, doesn't mean I'm going to like each other automatically. There's some mutual friends that we have that like they could even our friend Feinberg couldn't be any more different than me on every imaginable, but we're best of friends, but we don't like the same things at all. It's actually our common behaviors. So where I see that big mistake that people make is that they're comfortable working or connecting with someone that's like them. Even though if they're hiring for a role that requires a very different skill set, because they connected with that person through that hiring process, because like, oh my God, they're just like me. And then they start failing at that role. It's because there's a lack of appreciation or understanding of that human psychology. Most of the time it's like, I can't handle someone that's outside of me. I would be the first to admit that people that are like super hyper expressive, I had a hard time with them for the longest time in my life. Yeah, I would want to like fight them.
So now, having said that, because you mentioned a key word, which is comfort, right?
Yeah.
It says we're more comfortable hiring people that like us because we know what to expect, versus somebody who's different. Like, I don't really know exactly what to expect from you, so therefore I don't like it. But now we're talking about hiring people that are maybe pushing us out of our comfort zone a little bit. And the question I think I would ask if you were consulting with me and I was the owner, I would say, all right, then how do I know that this is the right person for the company? Because you mentioned at the beginning getting into culture and toxic, kind of some toxic behaviors or what have you. Like, I want to make sure I avoid that person. So then how do I do that since I can't really work it through the personality that I haven't identified quite yet?
Yeah. So that's a really good point. So where I would say is this, is that if when you're looking at toxicity is a perspective. It's like to who, right? What might be toxic to you is just perfect in Korean culture. This passive aggressive nature here is like really weird to me, but it might be really common in another culture, right? Or guilt or whatever. So that kind of idea of toxicity is really kind of relative. So where you want to begin with your organization is making sure that you have a clear set of morals and ethics and values that you are abiding by. And that's going to attract a tribe. If you look at, let's just say Coast Guard versus Navy, like Navy SEALs versus the Marine Corps, these are all branches of government that I respect, that do their job in protecting us. But oh my God, are the values and the core values of each one of those they're wildly different. Therefore, they attract a different folk. And the requirement needed for them to be a part of the Marine Corps, to be a part of a Navy SEAL is different. So where I see organizations make a mistake is that they don't really lock in on their own core values, describing what the core values are, what they mean, how do you demonstrate that on a daily basis, what are the opposites of those core values. So when you have those, then when you're going through a hiring process and based off of someone's behavioral assessment survey that like, cool, this person's wired for the role. But now I can ask them questions on integrity, on work ethic, on customer service, on passion or whatever the core values are, and figure out if this person has the heart to be in this organization. If they do, if they pass that and that, then the next thing is like, okay, let's talk about your experience.
What if a company doesn't have core values? It's like, Antonio, great advice, dude. We don't have values, or
Cool.
we don't know what they are.
Cool. Then don't hire until you set aside 30 minutes until you do that. Because the opposite of that, it's like, so what's the bigger risk?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, 30 minutes. You're not going to die if you don't hire someone in the next like 30 minutes. But let's take 30 minutes or an hour tops and actually reverse engineer what this is for you as a leader, as a CEO of the company, that this is your baby. This business has your DNA, your fingerprints, that this whole thing is going to be a top-down effect, right? These are things you're going to preach. These are things you're going to award people for, all this stuff. Or not do it. And then you're hiring anybody willy-nilly. And that is far more destructive to an organization, because now they're cancerous.
Yeah.
Maybe they're doing a job and they're filling out a role, but they're creating all types of drama inside of the workplace. But you're nervous about finding someone new because you didn't look in the right place, you didn't hire the right way, and you're stuck with somebody. And I would argue that that's going to be far more costly to your organization than spending an hour and going through what one of our modules, that when people come and work with us, is that we actually run them through a sequence to find out what these core values are that is uniquely them, the organization.
That's and you said something there, because I'm sure there's probably still some people like, yeah, but how do I actually know what my values are, right? And you kind of like mentioned there, which is like, what's the stuff that you talk about every day? Like the important things that you discuss with the team or with the employees, right? If it's, white glove service and understanding what that means, or, we have like certain behaviors that we exhibit with patients or customers, like that's that's what you value, right? It's like, what are the behaviors, like the stuff that you talk about every day that's important to you? Start there. So if, you mentioned like hard work and integrity, it's like probably stuff you're talking about on a day-to-day basis. Like, let's start there at least.
Yeah.
Because then you mentioned, all right, then I can come up with some questions about situations that called for integrity, or situations that called for not clocking out at 5 o'clock on the dot, and like something that required, and like, how did you respond to that? All right. Because I think that's also the point too. People get stuck on, what kind of questions do I ask people? Even if I understand what my core values are, like, how do I kind of tie the two together?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is where, when I would leverage certain AI tools too as well. So because it's going to be hard to kind of reverse engineer what are quality questions dependent on the core value.
Yeah.
So this is somewhere I would recommend using like a Grok or ChatGPT or Claude or anything, where it's like, hey, I have a core value of integrity. So we'll use integrity. What are some questions that I can ask to a prospect that I'm looking to hire on what integrity means to them, or situations where they had to be integrous, or if they saw someone lacking integrity, what did they do? And then what did you do? Or what did you do? And so you're kind of going through that process with every core value. And so now you're able to see like, oh, this person thinks integrity means not snitching on a coworker. I don't know about that.
Yeah. So when you talk about, and I like that you brought that up, because I've seen some stuff about people going into interviews and then more or less not being in person, obviously doing this, but having like a Zoom interview.
Yeah.
And they're basically just using the same AIs to actually, all right, what would they want to have as a response, right? But then I find that when you ask very specific questions, like, all right, talk to me about a time or a situation where you had to demonstrate this.
Yeah.
You can't fake that, right? There's no like, hey, ChatGPT, like make up a situation that, like,
you
really can't do it, because you can, even if they can create a fake situation, you can easily spot if you're good enough at what you're doing, just personality change in terms of their body language. Like, it's going to sound very fake when they're like reading a bullshit situation.
Yes. I feel like business owners can do better in asking quality questions. And some of the things that I tell sales teams, because it's really the extraction of information. Like, I want to get to know the needs of a prospect in order to sell them on the right service. But it's also understanding the needs of this potential employee, of like, what are the needs that they have, so that I can determine whether they're a good place for our organization. Because we're going to give them some really cool stuff, which is money in a comp package. But they're going to give us some really cool stuff, which is like effort and integrity and productivity. Yeah. So I want to make sure it's a good exchange. And what I tell the sales guys is TED, T-E-D. I got it from somewhere, but it stands for tell me, explain, and describe. So tell me of a time where you felt like I really I had a chance to lack integrity, but I decided not to. Explain what went through your mind. Describe what you were feeling. Describe what was around you. So when you're opening that up, you're able to get people to more get into storytelling mode, and then you're able to kind of lock in and be like, all right, is this bullshit or is this there? Is this solid? So I think TED is a really good one. Then also asking how and what questions. You know, when you're asking about integrity, like why, like what made it necessary for you to choose that particular time? How is this different than maybe other times? So you're still kind of expanding on that. I want to get the other person to tell me stories of this versus I think where some organizations are very black and white, and it depends on the role. Some roles people come in, it's a high turnover, and it's very like, do you have a pulse? Do you have a social security number? Are you American citizen? All right, let's get to work. It just depends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and before we move on to like my next question for you, that last whole thing you mentioned there about cost, right? So.
Oh yeah,
we're talking about obviously how to find the right talent, and you know, and people that are going to stay a long time. And you know, we didn't really mention this at the beginning, but there is an associated cost with each person that you hire. Mm-hmm. So if we're not understanding up to this point how important it is to understand your values, your standards, what questions to ask, what roles and responsibilities, what personalities, what positions you want. Most owners, I find, don't factor in how much does this cost for me to replace the employee if this doesn't work out, right? And like you just said, it's like, all right, not a big deal. Like I can just get rid of them, find another one. So like, all right, how much time is being spent on recruiting? How much time is being spent on interviewing? And then if you have a team who is actually training the employee, how much time are they spending?
It pulls productivity.
Yeah, right. So
you're
like
lacking productivity.
Exactly. So now you're losing productivity from key people. Or in medicine, it's like, all right, we lost the doctor. It's like, well, now who's seeing those patients, and how's that affecting care, or how's that affecting outcomes? So the stuff we're working on, guys, is important for you to understand because this is actually going to save you not just a lot of stress, but a lot of money in the long run. And I just felt I had to mention that because people don't actually really factor that in. So now you have...
It's a hidden cost that happens. It creeps up on people year end when they're doing taxes, when they're doing accounting, where they're like, wait a minute, where did my money go? And it's like, oh, there was an extra 50, 100, six figures, a grand that's just completely hemorrhaged because they hired the wrong person. They gave them a 90-day probationary period. They went to the very end because the person was begging, like, no, please, I just want to, right? And then it's like they cut loose, they get another one. Now they're 6 months in with really reduced down productivity, and they haven't found their superstar yet. And it's like, that's half a year just off of two people.
Yeah.
That's just two. So imagine you had a whole organization. So yeah, you want to be really efficient there. Yeah.
Now the other major point of discussion when people are doing interviews that I see a lot, like in LinkedIn, just all over social media, is this aspect of soft skills versus hard skills, right? So it's the technical skills of the job versus almost like the personality of the person. So curious to know how you would direct somebody to kind of look for, maybe tease out what's more important for the role and how to go about actually seeing what makes sense for them.
So one thing I would, so that's actually a really, really great question. When you're looking at those soft skills and hard skills, so soft skills is essentially engagement with another human being or groups of human beings. And then the next question is like, okay, is that engagement going to be with their colleagues, within that workforce, or is it going to be public facing, right? And from there, you're asking like, how often is this happening? Is this like 7 hours of their 8-hour day that they're going to be doing this? Then soft skills are really damn important on this one. If it's like, if they're accounting and they're just going through books all day long, it's like, not really. That's going to be very, very low. So then the hard skills, those technical skills are very, very valuable. So you want to take a look at how often are they having to verbally engage with another person? Is it a colleague or is it outside of the business? If that's a lot, then you really need to appreciate those soft skills. If it's not, then what's elevated is the hard skills. So it's kind of like this teetering effect. If it's balanced, then that person needs to be balanced. They need to be a little versatile. If it's not, they're just locked away in a cubicle all day and they are doing software and they're good with that, that's totally fine. So you want to look at the role from that, and I always look at it from that perspective first, because people can make a mistake promising something incorrect on a sales call, or they made a offensive joke to a coworker that was like totally out of line.
Yep.
So you want to look at that first, and then hard skills after that. And then at that point, it's pretty technical. Experience, how long, level of excellence, and then also verifying everything that they just mentioned.
Yeah. Now, I like that differentiation, right? Because it is very important based on the role. You know, if you're a doctor, it's like, I don't really have any empathy. I'm not very good at vulnerability, like telling people that I don't know things. It's like, that's probably not going to make a great doctor. But it's like, but I can do amazing surgeries. It's like, well, which one is actually important? Like, the surgery is important, but if you can't get the person to the point where you can do the surgery on them because you can't relate to them, you can't understand them, you can't admit maybe when you don't know exactly what's going on. It's like, so I find what you're saying there about even a person sitting in a cubicle. It's like, all right, they're on a phone all day or they're just typing away. It's like not the end of the world if they're not the most empathetic or, you know, what have you kind of person. So I like that. And I, like you said, it's a teetering act. And I think it's really going to be dependent upon what the role, but what the company is looking for. If it's, I think, a toss up, and this is just personal opinion, but I think if it's a toss-up between technical skills, but they're going to be a pain in the ass, versus a person who's like, I don't really know much, but they'll be the greatest employee, at least for me, I would take the employee. But I think it just depends on exactly, like you said, what you're looking for.
So this is where I think the beauty of partnerships come into play, where you can have someone that is counter to all of your, you know, your shortcomings, pretty much. You see this a lot in the restaurant space. You have a brilliant head chef, like an executive chef that will, like, if someone says like my scallop is like 1 degree undercooked, they'll fucking flip a table like Gordon Ramsay shit, like I'm an idiot sandwich. Like they'll go ballistic on somebody. So you want to have the right restaurateur that comes in that's more facing and ambiance and environment and you know, very rapport building and wine and like that experience. So sometimes like you can have a chef that can do both, or a restaurateur that does both. But in situations like that, if you're a business owner, you're like, going to the brain surgery is like, maybe I need to get like a partner where they can break down maybe some of the x-rays and everything else on why we need to do surgery. And I'm just the expert that comes in and operates. Yeah. So that's something, if you find yourself there, maybe get a partner.
Yeah.
Get a partner.
Now, there's a discussion, a talking point in society, in business, as it relates to who should be part of the interview process. And then a big topic at hand is, how many interviews should people go to? 10, 5, 1? So I'm curious to know, let's start with, because they're very interlinked. So let's start with, what's an appropriate number of interviews for people to ask of people that are looking for a job?
So it depends on the job, right? So if someone's like a taxi driver, or if you're hiring like someone that's going to be like, you know, a cash register or something like that. So you want to look at the value of that role that has to the organization. So if you're hiring like a high level COO for a business that's doing like 40 million a year, that vetting process is going to look a little bit different. Them walking into that organization, there's going to be the employees, the amount of employees they're responsible for, the impact that they're going to make to the business. All of that is very relative versus a McDonald's cashier, right? Maybe for like a cashier person or barista, it's just they walk in, they have a great smile, they have great energy, they're coachable, it's one of their first jobs. It's like, all right, we'll give you a shot. That is going to be a very different, simple thing versus hiring like a new COO, which you definitely want to do like a behavioral assessment tool. You want to have, in organizations that are a little bit larger, they have a specific HR department. They'll run them through kind of preliminary questions, background experience, and then typically like a manager of a department that's similar to that, and then usually a CEO or a president or a VP after that, where they're overseeing that. So, and again, like if it's, I don't know, if it's like Goldman Sachs hiring for like a new COO or a VP, like that's going to be a pretty long process. Yeah. It definitely can be. So it really depends. It depends on the role and the value. And the thing is that there's that saying, like, you want to hire slowly. So if you're just not getting it just yet, if there's a gut feeling, if things are just not adding up with the individual, or you feel like you just need to take more time with them, where it's like, good CEOs understand, like, I haven't connected just yet. I think they have it. I need to have a couple more meetings, or maybe do a lunch and maybe go outside of Orthodox and just do it that way, or do a presentation. And that actually might be the thing that clicks for a person. So Try not to be super duper rigid. Sometimes when you expand on that and do something that's a little bit unorthodox, you might find the right person.
Yeah.
So
I like that though, right? Because then it's like this aspect of we sit in a like a situation like this.
yeah, yeah,
And there's it's usually one of two things. The person's nervous as all hell. So
Mhm.
they're probably gonna meet. There's a good chance they might act a little bit differently, right? Or on
yeah,
the flip side, you get those people like I got to put on a little bit of a show, right? Make myself look better. But then you take them out of the boardroom or the back office, and it's like, hey, let's just go for lunch or
yeah.
go for a walk around the building, and all of a sudden it's like, like they let their guard down, they're a little bit more conversational, and you're like, all right, great person, or all right, they said stuff that I don't like. So I think that's a good point too. If you're like, you're not sure, it's like maybe just change the environment, and
Yeah.
maybe you get a different person, right? Versus getting surprised on like day 2 where it's like that's not the person that I hired.
Dude, it's essentially an audition. I
Yeah.
mean, you have some really amazing actors out there, like Academy Award winning actors, where they're like, I hate auditions, I suck at auditions, but once they get a role, like they absolutely crush it. And there's different ways of recruiting talent. I mean, there's a great story with like Leonardo DiCaprio was told by Martin Scorsese that you have to close essentially Daniel Day-Lewis for Gangs of New York. And it wasn't actually Martin Scorsese, it was Leo. And the way that they did that was they went out on a walk and sat down and just talked about the role and everything. And so like that's just so different than typically audition process, and then now they get a role. It's no different in business, really. You're just trying to find the right person.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into, right, who do we actually involve in the process? And you have mentioned, if you have an HR, what you hire them for is to be part of that process. So utilize them when you're hiring somebody. But then I find for, especially like smaller businesses, see this where there's no, let's get the team involved. Or I remember even, honestly for myself, I had a awesome CEO back in the day, but he would interview these individuals and then he wouldn't include me, which is like fine. But then he'd be like, all right, now you're working for Dan essentially. And I was like, bro, it doesn't make any sense. Like,
who is this person?
Yeah, like who is him? Like, why is he training me? And if he was that important, why wasn't he involved in the process to actually hire me into the company? And I finally sit down and like explain it to him, and he was like, yeah, I guess I never really thought about that. I'm like,
yeah,
dude, like it's not making sense. You do that all the time. So finally, he's like, all right, who's gonna actually be involved with this person?
A lot of ignorance, yeah.
Right? Because then it's like, all right, to your point, it's like, does the owner of a supermarket need to be the one interviewing a cashier? Like, maybe not. Maybe if you have like a store manager, let them do that, right? Or so it's just understanding too is like, who do we actually need to involve in this process? Like, who's actually key to this process of hiring and who's actually not? Because then I think sometimes we go overboard, and it's like you have a committee of 20. It's like it's a front desk role. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
So that's an important point too. And like you gave the example of Leonardo DiCaprio. It's like perfect point.
There's one component that I think because you want to think about this because this is varies from market to market. So here in Vegas, for example, it's a pretty transient town. A lot of people coming in, a lot of people leaving. The workforce, the lifeblood of this workforce changes quite a bit. I was just in Alaska a month ago, and in Anchorage, Alaska, it's very much an isolated market. Like you are kind of stuck with the workforce there. So you can't constantly do turnover in a place like that because there's a reputation that ends up happening amongst the workforce. Like, oh, you don't want to work with this organization because they don't know what the hell they're doing. And like they had a good hiring process, but then they had a terrible onboarding process. I don't know what the hell I was doing. Like, so it's kind of two things. So I feel like when you're in a town that's transient, like you want to, I think it's okay to maybe delegate some of that stuff where the best person that understands the role. So maybe like a lead cashier or like a department manager where it's like delegate that over there. It might actually be better. But I think in other markets, making sure that you have a touch point with someone that they're bringing in, even if it is a cashier, that may not be a bad idea, just so you can really make sure they're good.
Sweet. All right. So we got our questions. We got involving the team. What are we missing? What do you think? I mean, I know for me, what I kind of like to chime in on, I think is really two things. Number one is just, because I find it's a common question, like, where do I find talent?
Yeah.
And, right? So it's like, all right. Yeah, they still use monster.com. It's like, it doesn't even exist. But
yeah,
it's like,
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, right? So it's like understanding what job recruiting platforms, like you said, Indeed. You can hire a recruiter. a lot of people leaning into like social media nowadays, right?
Yeah.
It's like putting job postings on social. I mean, a ton of people don't even, stats show a lot of people aren't even going to Google as much for searching. They're going on TikTok,
Yeah.
and going on, your OpenAI and what have you. But it's like, where do I find a job? And like, what I love about like utilizing social media is you get to showcase, right, your company.
Mhm.
So you get people who've already seen what you look like. Now we're not going to get into the importance necessarily of having a robust social media, but it's an opportunity to show people, here's what we do. Like here's what we're all about. So you can see for yourself, is this the kind of place I want to look for? Anything else, like from a standpoint of if somebody said, where do I find people, you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So depending on some roles really lean into like a LinkedIn, right? Especially engineering, healthcare, things that kind of require like a formal education. You're going to find a lot more luck in those Indeeds, in kind of those in what's the one I just said?
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, yes. Whereas like if you have a working trade, so for example like construction or roofing or something like that, they don't typically have like no, it's not.
No.
Like you're actually far more likely. I had this with a client before, where they had an HR person trying to hire like roofers, installers, all that stuff, and they just had the worst luck on Indeed. It was a bunch of garbage, and they scrapped that. And the CEO was like, most of them are on Facebook. Like, why don't you go on these groups or these roofing groups or sales here or whatever. So there's a ton of like sales groups too as well, where people are sharpening their skills. And HR folks nowadays are going into those groups and be like, hey, I run this company, a coaching company, this one, and we're looking for salespeople. It's 5K minimum plus this. And like, then you have an avalanche of people that are applying to you. And it's like you're basically shooting fish in a barrel. So you want to look at the trade and what that position is, and then where do they roam? Because people are almost like classically trained to kind of go in these softwares. Yeah. And it's like that's not where that role is. That role is actually here or someplace else. So you want to open that up just to find the right talent.
Yeah. Nah, I would honestly add just one more thing is just your local colleges. You know, it's like tried and true, but we've gotten away from it a little bit. But you have people maybe in the field that you work in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're like graduating and they're like 10 minutes down the road. It's like maybe utilize them, interns, great way to train somebody and then hire them and they already know what they're doing. So I just feel like people make it harder than it really needs to be. It's like, all right, what did we do before we had Google? Like, we found a way to do it. So it's like maybe sometimes just using some grassroots kind of stuff goes a long way. Anything else you'd want to add in? Golden nuggets?
I think it's always good to get different perspectives. So, and I think especially like if it's a man interviewing a woman or a woman interviewing a man, I think it's good to have like other people in the room too as well. There's some states where just because of the employment laws, like you should have someone kind of there with you just to kind of be, on the safe side.
Sure.
But then also like they can kind of see maybe different angles that you didn't see, or they answered something in a way that you took it in one perspective and they took it in a different way. So I think it's really good to kind of leverage your team and bring them on board on that journey. Like, hey, we want to expand, but I don't want to bring just absolutely anybody. And you know this role better than I do, or you do great work here. Can you jump in for 15 minutes and give me your feel? Talk about that builds culture, builds morale, shows trust. Even if you go, even if you don't, or you're not going to necessarily listen to them, they feel involved. And if you can do little bits and pieces of that, I don't think that's actually a terrible thing.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a bad thing at all.
Just don't tell them you're not going to take their advice.
Yeah.
Like, well,
just come in. Yeah.
Yeah, man. I think the only thing I would add is, and I've gotten this feedback, is just how to structure out an interview when you have really no time. Like maybe you're that doctor who's running a practice and you're also the same doctor who's seeing all the patients. It's like, I don't have a long time. So I do find the two things is just number one is use technology, right? So if we could do a Zoom interview, you don't have to, take it wherever you need to take it. But then this aspect of even just creating like something I've utilized in the past is creating like a little, pre-interview screen, like a 5-10 minute phone screen of just, all right, is this even somebody I'd want to bring in and block off maybe half an hour or an hour. So it's the little things that are, maybe it's not the norm, but if you're like, I don't have the time, but I need the help, what do I do? And I still want to meet the people and not just trust a recruiter to send somebody to me. that's a little something that's definitely helped me out.
I'll kind of add on two really quick things. So one of them is having the prospect record themselves and send like a video, like a Loom video, like a 30-second Loom video. Here's 3 questions. Answer these 3 questions, and you can actually see them in real time. And usually within like 10 seconds, you're like, nope, no way. And other times you see somebody and you're like, I like this person. Yeah, I just have a good feeling. There's something about human nature where you can look at someone and be like, I got a good feeling about this person. I don't know what it is. They're stumbling, they're mumbling, but they're trying. I just have a good feeling about it. And you can have someone else that's like super polished and you're like, this is a snake, dude. I can tell. So having the prospects record themselves, I don't think that's actually a bad idea. There's another one too, and I think I forgot. But
not like that, because I've seen that even from some companies where it's like, hey, like they're recruiting, for me, and it's like, it's not a visual, but it's just an audio recording. It's like, hey, I'm Dan. Here's what I'm applying. Blah blah. It's like, all right, even that's good. You hear how they speak, so it gives you a little something. So there's definitely tools. So you guys really don't have any excuses to say I don't have the time, I don't have the resources. Clearly, we've just outlined outside of how to construct a phenomenal interview. You also know where do I find talent? How do I screen them out? So you really have here is like almost a bulletproof way of bringing on the talent. So you can stop saying, I can't find anybody good. Nobody wants to work anymore. You get aligned, and you'll have great talent. Anything you want to add to that, brother?
Yeah. Whenever you're looking at bringing on someone for a role, if it's like super structured or if it's, if you know that the role that they're going into, they can get pulled in 1,000 different directions, leverage improvisation. So like if just throwing a random question at someone and just saying like, hey, if a penguin walked in here wearing a mariachi hat, what would it say? And if they freeze and they do all that, like it's kind of an indicator, but if someone rolls with it really well, it's like, cool. I like that someone could think on their feet. So take that into consideration when you're bringing someone for a role is like, does it require them thinking on their feet? And how can I recreate that inside the hiring process?
Love it. All right, guys. I think that's it, man.
That's it.
We're good. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you on the next episode.